Hey guys, welcome to my video tutorial on how to use the Litening Targeting Pod on the F-18C Hornet. It's great for spotting and designating targets, and it can be equipped on either the center station or the left cheek station. The gimbal camera has a good field of view, but it can be masked by your aircraft depending on where the pod is placed, your bank angle, and while looking directly behind you around 40 degrees. Good operating altitude is around 25,000 feet to avoid terrain masking your target, and it can also be useful to engage the autopilot while you're using the pod. I use barometric hold or attitude hold to fly in a circle so I can find my target and not fly out of the area. The pod is still in development, but it's very functional and quite lethal in its current state. It's equipped with a CCD camera and a forward-looking infrared or a FLIR camera. You can switch quickly between these two modes to help find your target. The pod can be used to designate a target point for dumb bombs, send coordinates to your GPS guided weapons, and it's also equipped with a laser spot search mode and a laser designator. You can power the pod on with the switch right here on the right console, but keep in mind if you do a cold start, it takes about 2 minutes for the INS to warm up and for the FLIR camera to cool down. You can also put it in standby mode, which will keep it warmed up, but it will stow the camera head to keep it from getting damaged. And the switch to the right is to arm the pod's Laser Target Designator Ranger, or LTDR. Note that this won't arm unless you're in air-to-ground master mode, and the default position is in full back in the aft position, which is not currently implemented. So you got to move that up twice to go to the arm mode. Once the pod is ready, it can be accessed from the TAC page. It can be displayed on either DDI or the MFCD, but good practice is to display it on your right DDI, as the left screen will automatically switch to the stores page whenever air-to-ground or air-to-air master mode is selected. So to be able to move the camera around to find our targets, first we got to bring up the camera display, and then we're going to press the sensor control switch in the direction of whichever display it's on. So in our case, I'm going to push sensor control switch right. Notice the diamond in the top right corner of the screen shows that that screen is active, and then you can use your slew controls to move the camera around. Alright, so now let's take a look at the buttons and information that we see on the camera screen here. Up here we have the wide and narrow field of view button, which you can press to zoom in, zoom out, or you can short press on the HOTAS button, RAID FLIR field of view, in order to cycle between the wide and narrow views. Right here you see the degrees and azimuth left or right of center that the camera is looking, and on the side you see the degrees of elevation. This button isn't currently implemented, and the button below it is your VVSL or velocity vector slave, which is used to slave the pod camera to your aircraft's velocity vector. That's useful for quickly pointing the pod in the general area that you want to search for targets. And once you've pointed in the general area with the velocity vector, you can then switch the pod to an area track mode or use TDC designate in order to enable you to fine-tune the slew area using your slew controls. As a side note, you can also use waypoint designate on your HSI in order to slave the pod to an existing waypoint. Right here you see the UFC button, and when we press that, then you can change the laser search or designate codes on the UFC. Default for both of them is 1688. And right here you see your barometric altitude indicator above the declutter button, which removes additional data displayed on the screen. But I usually leave that on because it helps avoid accidents while you're focused on the camera. And over here you see the laser spot search code and the LSS mode enable button. Then over on this side you can see your airspeed and Mach indicator above the white hot, black hot display option. Pressing that will cycle between which color is displayed as hot on your screen if you're using the FLIR camera. Next, we have a button here to cycle between CCD and FLIR mode. CCD is just your regular camera, and FLIR detects heat signatures. You can change quickly between camera modes using a long press of your RAID FLIR field of view button on the HOTAS. And above that we have the zoom level. You can zoom in on both the wide and the narrow field of view using either the buttons on the side of the screen or using the antenna elevation button on your HOTAS. And finally we have area track and point track modes. An area track will fix the pod wherever you aim it, and point track will fix the pod on a heat signature. You'll attempt to track a moving target and notice the difference in symbology between the modes when we switch through. You can cycle between area and point track using the sensor control switch in the direction of the active DDI. So again, with our screen here on the right, I'll press sensor control right, and that will cycle it between area track and point track. If you want to reset your camera position, you can use the cage uncage button on your HOTAS. This will fix the gimbal in the cage position, which is going to be 0 degrees azimuth and about -5 degrees elevation from your nose. Now note that this is different from the default snowplow mode that the pod starts in. Currently, snowplow mode operates differently than other aircraft in that it sets your pod elevation to about -8 degrees below your velocity vector. Although keep in mind, the elevation is measured relative to the nose of your aircraft. So your aircraft's angle of attack will be reflected in the pod elevation angle. For example, an angle of attack of 2 degrees would read -10 degrees elevation if you're in snowplow. So you can see how the pod measures from the aircraft's nose when we switch to VVSL. The pod elevation will match your angle of attack. In the pod's current state of development, to switch to snowplow mode, you have to cycle the VVSL option on and off, or you can designate and undesignate a target. You can use TDC to press to designate a point as a target, and it will also send coordinates to a GPS guided weapon if one is selected in the stores page. Note the diamond on the HUD indicating the position of your designated target. To help you visualize where the pod is looking, you can reference this dot on the screen that will show you where the pod is aimed relative to your aircraft if you pictured your aircraft superimposed over the center of this screen. You'll notice when we power on our laser, additional options appear around the screen. You'll also see the L arm now displayed on the top. You'll see trig, which sets your gun trigger to fire the laser, and note that when this is boxed, you'll be unable to fire the gun. You can see when the laser is firing by the arm indicator switching to LTDR. The laser will fire using whatever code you set with the UFC, but the default is 1688. You'll see we also have a mark option that enables you to fire a marking laser. This doesn't have a laser code, so you can't use it to guide any laser guided weapons. You'll notice the symbology changes to indicate you're in mark mode. This laser can be seen using NVGs, and it's useful for indicating targets for other friendly aircraft. And finally, we'll take a look at LSS, or laser spot search mode. When it's boxed, your pod will begin searching for a laser reflection using the selected laser code, default again as 1688. Note the video feed will freeze, and an indication of the seeker head will start sweeping back and forth across the screen. This can be used to find a specific target being designated by a JTAC or another aircraft, and once the seeker finds a valid laser code, it will slave the targeting pod to that point. Although the pod searches a wide azimuth, it will only search a few degrees in elevation from your selected area. So you have to adjust the pod's elevation close to the laser location and be within about 14 nautical miles of the target. Also note that LSS won't turn on when the pod is in snowplow mode. First you have to enable the area track in proximity to the laser target, and then you can enable LSS. And that about covers all the basic functions currently implemented in the Litening Targeting Pod. To learn how to use the targeting pod to deliver GPS guided or laser guided weapons, reference some of my other video tutorials. For now, thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.